welcome to episode 481 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I am here with
Grace Winburn,
Andrew Swafford,
Michael O'Malley.
We figured it out.
Yeah. And in part one, we're going to be talking about movies that we saw this week. And then in part two, we got a very special live recording from our live podcast a few weeks ago from the Independent Picture House in Charlotte, North Carolina. We talked about 1984's Repo Man.
Mm-hmm.
And real quick, how did y'all feel? I mean, nobody listening here has heard that part yet, but
that's true. We're time travelers from the future podcast.
How did you? I mean, we had a pretty good crowd, like 60, 70 people.
A lot of them stayed for the discussion afterwards too.
A lot of them stayed for the podcast.
They made great comments. I hope that you can hear them in the audio recording that we have for you. But
yeah, Grace was like hustling across the theater, like trying to catch people with the mic before they started talking.
I had my running boots on. I sure did. My running boots were on.
In retrospect, we probably should have thought a little bit more about how to get, because people, they just started talking and Grace is like microphone. But real quickly, how did everybody feel about the live podcast? Grace?
I felt fantastic. That was a blast. That was really thrilling for me. I know that you guys in the past might have experienced something similar, but that was a big first for me. So just 10s across the board. It was fantastic. Would do again. Our audience really made the movie for me and unlocked a better understanding and a deeper connection to this film. So I, like them, have these wonderful personal stories and relationships to this movie that I had never heard of prior to this. So I am so grateful for this.
Yeah, I was surprised to hear how many audience members caught it when it was originally new, because it's a movie that didn't get a particularly wide release when it first came out and has sort of been rediscovered on the home video market. So cool to see people coming out for nostalgic purposes. But also, I want to say that I was really grateful to our guest, Sam Shapiro, who's a film professor out in Charlotte, and just had so many great things to say about Repo Man, a lot of enthusiasm for the film. He also went out with us for a drink afterwards. We got to talk about a lot more movie things. And
that was a great time.
We should record something like that for the Patreon next time, and subscribe, like, follow, donate, and then you can hear further insightful conversations.
Having beers with Cinematary.
We could sell that. Come hang out with us in person.
Yeah. I think Grace is trying to re-inhabit her persona over the weekend, in which she was constantly repping our podcast, probably more than anyone on this show has ever done. In fact, the doorman at one of the venues that we went to the night before ended up coming to the or not the podcast, but the movie. He ended up coming to the movie and the podcast.
Yeah, I just want to say for those not in Charlotte who weren't in Plaza Midwood on that Friday night, Grace, we went to a couple venues that night and we went to one and listened to some music, and then we went to another venue and hung out for a little while. Grace was going up to people and hyping this podcast. We gained 15 new Instagram followers. We had all these people talk, she was talking to us. The music venue we were at was a buzz about Cinematary, because Grace was talking to everybody in there. So if next time we have a live podcast or in Toronto in a couple weeks, it's the talk of TIFF is going to be Cinematary. I'll just say
That's right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Grace is also running the Instagram now, so we actually have a working Instagram, if you don't already follow us there.
It helps to have someone who knows and cares about social media presence to run it.
And that I do. Thank you.
Yeah, I know and don't care. So that's the bad combination. But let's go ahead and jump into the movies that we saw this week. We'll have more Repo Man in the second part. But yeah, the movie of the season right now, Trap. The latest from M. Night Shyamalan. I'll give a quick synopsis and then we can jump into it. But Trap, it's M. Night's latest movie. It stars Josh Hartnett. And it's about, he plays a father. He's taking his teen daughter to a concert, kind of like a
It's the Eras Tour.
It's like a Taylor Swift
Eras Tour starring M. Night Shyamalan's daughter.
Yes.
Yes. And so they get there. She's all excited for this concert. She's been waiting. She loves this artist, and slowly he realizes that this actually is a concert that is set up as a trap for a notorious serial killer who is also Josh Hartnett. Same person, and they're trying to trap him in this concert, and so
pulling every adult man out of the crowd.
Literally, like they're
suspicious that you're here at the Eras Tour.
Slightly above height, white man, like average height white man.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think we, here at Cinematary, we've been fans of M. Night's recent run with Old and Knock at the Cabin. But yeah, what did y'all think, Michael?
I thought it was really fun. It's not, it's not going to pass the CinemaSins smell test. Probably it's a kind of preposterous movie, but I love that about it. And also I was, I like The Sixth Sense and Signs and all that, like back when they, first were coming out, but I would have never considered myself a big M. Night Shyamalan, like apologist. But like one of the things that I've come to appreciate about his like post director jail output, like, I don't know, whatever we want to call like The Visit onward, like Split, all that, is that I've come to realize that the way he writes characters, like no one else writes characters like that. And that's like just really interesting. Like these characters open their mouths and say things that I don't think anyone else would have thought for them to say. And I don't know. I just really like it. It's kind of like an auteurist thing in a little bit. Like it's fun that he just has his own personal stamp, but also it creates this weird texture to his movies where everything's just like slightly off kilter. Mm-hmm. And I'm not even sure if this is always an intentional effect, but I've come to really like find it charming in his movies. And this movie is like full of it. Like, I think it is intentional with Josh Hartnett's character, who is like literally living this bifurcated life where he has to constantly be switching between serial killer mode and adorable dad mode. But like, I don't know, there's other parts too. Like there's this guy who's running the merch booth. Where he's like an employee in the merch booth, and he's like amazing, but he's so like, he's odd. Like there's just something like, it's just like just a few clicks off of how like I think most movies would have like engaged with that character and how that character would have like spoken. And I don't know,
such enthusiasm,
and like it's just pure like unabashedly hokey, like, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but this concert's really a trap. Like, I don't know. Anyway, the whole movie's kind of like that, and the movie just keeps going, and more preposterous things happen, and I had a really good time. It's a lot of fun. Knock at the Cabin was my number one movie of the year last year. And it's not good like that. It's not even good like Old, which was Cinematary's number one movie whenever that happened. But I think that this is just a good time. And it is a good time while also being like distinctively like a Shyamalan movie. Mostly for good, I would say.
Yeah, it's like a high concept B movie premise executed very well, I would say. And like, I love the premise. The
premise is amazing.
Serial killer trying to escape the Eras Tour, amazing. I am already on board. I was walking into this expecting it to be like my favorite of the new Shyamalan movies. It isn't quite that. I still think that Knock at the Cabin is the best thing he's done since getting out of director jail, like you, Michael. But I had a lot of fun at this. It's kind of a blast. And I think that you really can't overstate the skill, the acting skill on display here from Josh Hartnett. The movie would not work without him. He just has such range, and like range that is expressed in these very minute ways. Like so much of his acting is acting with his face. Like he's kind of opening his eyes a little bit too wide at times and smiling a little too forcefully. But he has to like constantly, like you said, code switch between like, I'm a serial killer now to I am talking to like the mom of one of my daughter's friends at a pop concert
while they're having like friend drama, and the mom wants to like litigate the friend drama at the concert.
It's amazing. And like so
another
many
great
of these
Shyamalan
interactions
touch.
Yes, there's layers to this. Avenues that are unexplored, but that you wish were. But all these interactions between him and other people, where he's like always has this ulterior motive. So many of them are shot with that like Silence of the Lambs style, like camera pointed directly at the person's eyes, which really, I don't know, heightens a certain sense of like interpersonal tension between people, and really like allows you to study Josh Hartnett's face and like what he's doing to try to sell himself to somebody as like a plausible version of whatever he's trying to be in that moment. And so I just enjoy watching him and like get kind of a thrill out of wondering how he's gonna get out of whatever new trap he finds himself in.
There are some amazing, sorry, Andrew.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, there are some amazing red herrings, like, along the way, like, about, like, is he going to do this? Like, at one point, it turns out that he and his daughter are sitting next to the trap door that, like, guest singer comes out of.
Right.
And he's like,
you really want to go down there.
Wouldn't it be fun if we just jumped down there?
Oh, my God.
His daughter's like, no, Dad.
Speaking of like just the preposterousness of everything here, like the amount of times he leaves his daughter like in rapid succession in the front of this concert and just like effortlessly gets back to her is just ridiculous to me.
Yeah, it's funny that like you mentioned at the top that like they're interviewing and pulling out like every like 6'3" white guy to like interview, and they never get to him.
No.
There's this amazing line like later in the movie where like one of the like agents who's searching is like, there are 23,000 people at this concert and 20,000 of them are women. Like,
in the whole like floor, the trapdoors scene also, like, you mentioned Josh Hartnett. One of the other things about this movie is how much of a girl dad movie this is, like peak girl dad movie.
He's so supportive of his.
Yeah, he's incredibly, and so like that makes it, because like you're like, all right, he's a serial killer. But you kind of like, part of me at least was like, I'm kind of rooting for him.
You never see him do any serial killer stuff. He's not there to do serial killer stuff. He's just there to support his daughter.
There to support his daughter. And he's like,
he does have his remote serial killer app.
Yes.
That he keeps on his phone.
Log on and keep tabs on the person in some random.
It's like a Ring camera, though. We're
like a Ring camera with like a poison pill attached to it.
The thing I love about his performance, though, is the intonations that his voice. He shifts from like serial killer mode to like customer service voice. Like he just talks like this. He's like, "Oh, that's so fascinating. That's we should definitely do that. How about we go meet another time at like 1 p.m. and go get pizza? That sounds great."
That is like, a very good impression. Yeah.
And like it's intoxicating because there is that code switch where, to a degree you're like, you can't talk like a normal person to a degree to like your daughter's, a parent of one of your daughter's friends, because like you got to kind of somewhat keep this relationship civil because your daughter might want to be friends with them or something like that. It's preposterous, like the different ways that he gets into different rooms and sections of this arena. But at the same time, like it makes sense because he kind of doesn't draw attention and is very earnest. And like, you're like, all right, attractive white guy, above 6 feet, really earnest. He can get anywhere the hell he wants. Like he can get anywhere he wants to go. I mean, at one point he's like in this room that's kind of like a break room space, and all these SWAT members are sharing information and prepping to like find the serial killer. And he's over there. And he's like, "Do y'all want some coffee? Oh, I can get some donuts for you." Yeah. And it's just like it had like almost his superpower. Like to a degree, I was thinking about like Unbreakable and and some of the kind of superpower M. Night movies, and I'm like, his superpower is just being like a charming white guy.
Yeah,
and he can get anywhere he wants.
Superpower.
Yeah, like his privilege is his superpower, and like to that degree, like that was. Honestly, I could have stayed the entire movie in that concert because
that was what I was about to say. Is that like I feel like the movie loses steam when it leaves the concert,
and
I was kind of wondering like what could it do after that moment? Because of course Shyamalan's known for the twists, and I'm like, what's the twist going to be? And there kind of isn't one in this movie.
There's like a few different moments that could be a twist, but then the movie kind of keeps going with it. I like it when. I agree that the movie kind of loses steam after it leaves the concert, but it does so in a really strange, like structural way. Like it changes protagonists for about like 20 minutes, for example. And then like the final-ish scene is like just him and his wife like sitting down at a kitchen table.
With his shirt off too.
With his shirt off, eating pie. Like
that's like a comment on Marvel movies where they just have like the superhero, like the Chris Hemsworth or something, like take their shirt off. Like Josh Hartnett, they're like, just take your shirt off for this. Like the ladies will love it.
Yeah, I do think that like it's a pretty ramshackle movie, and like it's fun because of how silly it is. Like I think if you go in like expecting like I'm going to be on the edge of my seat, like kind of like slightly anxious, like a really taut thriller. Like I don't think that this movie is going to deliver that. It's more like a carnival ride a little bit.
It's super fun.
Very fun.
Yeah, very fun.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Go check out Trap. It's a fun time. Girl Dad.
Also, Cinematary is. I don't know if we've announced this or not. We're going to do a Shyamalan series later this year. Trap is not going to be on it, but we're gonna cover the big highlights from.
We'll probably talk about it a little bit. Our last movie that we're going to cover is Knock at the Cabin, and we'll probably talk about Knock at the Cabin and Old and Trap as like this kind of recent revival that he's had.
I would say The Visit and Split belong in that conversation as well. I like both of those movies.
Yeah, I feel like The Visit is where he kind of got his groove back.
Oh, also, speaking of, I saw some Letterboxd review. I wish I could remember who wrote it at this point, but talking about Trap as this extended metaphor for M. Night Shyamalan getting out of director jail again and again. How's he going to do it this time?
It is amazing. Like I was looking at his box office stuff, and like as much as like I feel like even still his name has a little bit of a stigma for some people.
Yeah.
But like he's been killing it box office wise. Like these modestly, budgeted movies are like bringing like, quadruple or more of like their budgets in the box office.
All of them are like single location movies too. I mean, you're talking about how Trap eventually does leave the concert, but most of it is in the concert. And then you have like Knock at the Cabin, In the Cabin, The Visit,
Old,
like at Grandma's
Old's
house.
At the beach.
The beach that makes you old. Yeah.
We haven't mentioned Glass, but that's all in the same building, basically.
Yes. Yeah. Glass is the one dud of the bunch for me.
Dud, but it's a strange one though. Like
it is a very strange one.
I feel like the average moviegoer who's just like, hey, what's playing this weekend? I'm gonna go catch something. Is probably doesn't like get held up on like The Last Airbender or After Earth and stuff like that. Like they're just. That's I think true. they probably still think of like. The Village and Signs and Six.
Well, if you look on the advertising, it's interesting because some of them are starting to be advertised as like from the director of Split or from the director of The Visit or something like that, which is, I think, good for him that he's got, later career movies than just like his early hits that can advertise for him.
Yeah. Speaking of horror movies that have come out recently, Grace, can you tell us a little bit about Cuckoo?
I will do my best, certainly, but I definitely wasn't cuckoo about it. Let that lay out.
Very nice, very nice.
I I was very excited to see this. I thought I would catch it on a whim. I have expressed in the past that I am such a wimp when it comes to horror movies, and that's what I was expecting this to be. So I was a little nervous to see it by myself, but I felt very brave that night. And lo and behold, I really wasn't that scared because it turned out to be less of a horror movie and more of a conspiracy thriller, and one that I feel a little unsatisfied with. For me, my understanding is that we enter into this idyllic hamlet. Something is amiss in paradise. What is happening beneath the surface of this beautiful pastoral refuge? And we enter the story with Gretchen, played by Hunter Schafer, who is phenomenal. I was not familiar with any of her skills. I'm not someone that's watched Euphoria. So to see her as this fully actualized, fully realized, awkward but ambitious and rebellious and petulant teenage girl, suffering tremendous loss, dealing with grief and feelings of maybe some loneliness, and then feeling isolated within her dad's family. Her dad has remarried and has another child, so she's got a half sibling, so something to contend with. So she's really struggling with like a lot. And she stumbles into this larger conspiracy that I don't feel like we really have any background for. Nothing's really explained to us. Something's going on. We stumble into it, and then it's so much bigger than us. But it has a beginning, middle, and end for Gretchen, but not for us as the audience. She has a beginning before this. She stumbles into this. She tries to get herself out of it. She separates from it. So she has a complete, 3-act experience in this resort, but I don't think we do. And I think that there's a much bigger conspiracy that, I wonder if they'll do anything else with. But overall, it just felt a little incomplete for me. And I felt like I just kind of rushed through it. There's some really interesting style choices, some really interesting editing. There's this looping effect that gives a psychedelic feel to it, something very trippy and disorienting. But I wasn't blown away.
I was wondering about the vibes of the movie because I saw Tillman Singer, this director's first movie, Lose, at Knox Horror Fest several years ago. And I really did not care for that movie narratively, but the vibes were great.
The vibes were certainly great for this as well. I will 100% say that. There's a bit of a romance. Love to see it. It's a little funny. But some things are just kind of left up in the air as like we don't know what happens and we don't need to know what happens. But it does a really good job connecting these two siblings looking for a family. So there's a lot there, but it felt like it fell short in a couple aspects, and I felt a little hollow afterwards. And I had a weird theater experience. Somebody was yelling during it, so that took me out of it. But beyond that, I think it's worth it for like a quick, let's go catch a movie. Let's be distracted for a little bit.
Hey, what more can you ask for?
No. Did I freeze?
A little bit.
You are frozen.
Andrew, tell us a little bit about Janet Planet.
Janet Planet, man, what a movie! What a picture! This is definitely like in the running for my favorite film of the year. It's either this or I Saw the TV Glow, and it's very, very difficult to choose. But
I Saw the TV Glow coming to Max in a couple weeks, so if you missed it,
cool. Yeah, go check that out.
Anyway.
Janet Planet, unfortunately, more difficult to see at the moment. I had to. Oh wait, no, it's rentable now. I had to buy it.
Just this weekend, I believe it's rentable.
Dang it! Just a couple of days before that, I paid $20 to buy it on Apple TV.
Damn.
But anyways, Janet Planet is the debut feature of director Annie Baker. And it is about a mother-daughter relationship. Lacey is the daughter character, and her mother is Janet. She has like a acupuncture service or something that is called the Janet Planet, which is where the title comes from. But it's also kind of about the daughter's extreme attachment to her mother and her inability to kind of connect with other people outside of her mother. It's set over the summer. The movie starts at a summer vacation or like a summer camp that Lacey is at, that she calls her mom and like asks her to come get her from. And it's this very slow, funny opening sequence where we're watching her like walk through the dark through like, you know, the cabins of this camp in like this one really long protracted dark shot. And then she picks up a phone and says like, I'm going to kill myself if you don't come get me. And it's like such a dark moment, but very, very funny in a way that like only this movie is funny. It has so much very understated, quiet humor to it that is often like you just being presented something with basically no context, but you figuring it out. Like there's a scene where Lacey is at a piano lesson, and you just see her clapping and saying Mississippi hot dog, Mississippi hot dog over and over and over. And like the movie is just funny in that exact way. It's very mundane. It's often the humor is kind of punctuated through editing. And that editing is also kind of presenting the lives of these characters in this fragmented mosaic. There's not necessarily a clear like narrative through line through the movie, though there is kind of like a structural one. The movie is structured in these 3 chapters that are all characterized by the men that the mom is seeing. Or I guess 2 of the chapters are men that the mom is seeing. And the second one is like a friend of hers who comes to stay with them for a little while. And it's kind of about how the ways in which these characters' lives are just shaped so strongly by like another presence being in the home, because otherwise it's just Lacey and Janet. And all 3 of those chapters have very different tones to them because of the different energies that these people bring into their lives. But one thing that kind of like carries you throughout the entire movie is the cinematography, which is just incredible. I would call this a slow cinema movie. It is. There
it is. I was wondering your take on this.
I would consider Janet Planet to be slow cinema. Very patient, long takes, usually static camera, and the framing is always very thoughtful and intentional. Lacey is often placed at like the edge of a frame as opposed to the center, because she's always kind of trying to not be the center of attention. She's just kind of like an outsider to the rest of the world, observing everything else. One moment that stuck out to me was there's a moment where she just like goes and lays down on the ground by the road outside of her mom's house, and like she is like exactly at the bottom of the frame, like the frame is cutting off the bottom half of her body. And then there's also Michael wrote very eloquently in his review on Letterboxd about the shot that is on the poster of the movie, which is like this triple mirror that the characters are standing in and looking at themselves in, but the bottom of Lacey's head is cut off, and I'm sure that he could explain like what's going on there better than I could. But I just felt like almost every moment of this movie, cinematically speaking, was like saying something that the characters themselves were not saying. Another moment that stands out to me is the only moment in the movie where Lacey makes a friend, which is like the daughter of her mom's boyfriend at the time. Like as soon as they become friends, there's this hard cut to them like rushing through the mall, and the shot opens with the camera just like this like really fast lateral tracking shot like going past like all these like mall windows, and then eventually like the friend kind of catches up to the camera, and you're like looking at her in this extreme close-up that's meant to be like very adoring in the same way that Lacey sees her. And it's just, you know, so like well observed, so like emotionally rich. I do think it's kind of a difficult pitch. Like, I feel like I'm not doing a good enough job selling this movie, but it really is like one of the best cinematic experiences I've had this year. I hope people go seek it out if they missed it in the theaters like I did. Also, side note, there's some great needle drops in this movie. Two that stand out to me being a song by Beverly Glenn Copeland and a song by Laurie Anderson, both of which are kind of reflective of the music taste of the friend who comes to stay with them in the middle section of the movie. But yeah, fantastic movie. Michael, what did I miss about it? What else should we say?
I mean, I love what you had to say. I might have talked about this on the podcast before. I can't remember, but I also thought it was great. I think, to me, like, one of the interesting things, and I think I might have talked about this last time, I definitely talked about it in my Letterboxd review, is that, like, you know, you mentioned the mom has like an acupuncture business, but like she's kind of part of like a whole like local scene in the movie,
a new age scene. Yeah.
Yeah, like this kind of like early to mid 90s like new age scene. And so like a lot of the people that you encounter and a lot of the social interactions are kind of filtered through this. And so there's like a kind of extended sequence where you watch like a theater troupe, and then you find out it may be a cult. And then like the cult guy becomes one of the characters that is important later in the film. And like, it's just like really interesting, the movie's perspective on that, you know, which in a lot of ways is just like, I don't know. I guess I feel like New Age is either something that like is like rapturously embraced or like a kind of like a caricatured like laughing stock, right? And this movie has like a kind of weird, like almost documentary approach to this environment that I thought was really interesting. And it's also a period piece because it's in like the early 90s. And I think the period detail is really immaculate, especially when it intersects this, the kind of like, you know, niche subculture that it's engaging with. And like one last thing I'll say is that I love that the girl, she has like this little like playhouse or cabinet or something where she keeps all these trinkets and like creature, like little doll things that she's made, and
things that she's made into dolls that were not originally intended to be dolls. Right. One of them is just a little Buddha statue.
Yeah. And it's like a recurring thing in the movie where she'll like go play with it or she'll add something to it. And I think that like, as someone who is a father of children who are not quite as old as this person, but has definitely seen this sort of behavior in children where they like have these like little almost like diorama setups that they're like repurposing things. And it's like, oh yeah, this pencil is a rocket ship and, you know, whatever. Like, I don't know. That's like a really like well-observed like aspect of like child psychology that like I don't see in movies. Like a lot of times movies, like when they try to make quirky kids, will make them like precocious and kind of like, you know, adult-like. And a lot of times kids are just odd. And I think this movie does a really good job of like capturing like just like an oddball kid who is like also like, you know, obviously not just the POV character, but like the kind of emotional, you know, one of the emotional pulls of the movie, while also not really sanding down the fact that like, you know, this is like a kind of an odd kid, and it in a certain way it makes sense why she wouldn't want to stay at a summer camp because probably the other kids didn't know what to do with her and like things like that. Anyway, good movie.
Also, like as a period piece, really captures kind of the mundanity of kids growing up in like a pretty low tech age.
Yeah,
you know, she has a little dollhouse full of figurines she plays with because she doesn't have all that much else to do. You also see long sequences of her practicing playing piano on this little Casio keyboard. I
love the keyboard. Well. She goes to the piano teacher's house and it's a real piano.
Yes. Also, you talking about like the new agey stuff reminded me that another one of the very like slow, patient, but hilarious parts of the movie is like when that guy comes over to their house for dinner and just like it gives this very long explanation of like the creation of the universe.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, this guy is like
in the beginning
in evangelist mode
right?
the whole time.
Right? Yeah.
I love how the movie ends up dealing with him too. It's not really a spoiler movie, like a movie that you spoil, but the one thing that ends up happening with him, I think, should not be spoiled.
And it's kind of a slow cinema thing in that it's kind of a reality breaking moment.
Yeah.
When that character is eventually kind of like reaches their conclusion. But Janet Planet, people should go watch it. Amazing movie.
Well, the Janet Planet was distributed by A24, so I would think it's probably it probably should like pop up on streaming because A24 has been pretty active. So, but yeah, we got a few minutes left. Grace, do you want to talk about a movie that we were supposed to talk about a few weeks back, but you went on a long journey to find it and got to watch The Nightingale's Prayer finally?
I did. I will do my best to be as succinct as possible. But this is from 1959. This is a meandering romantic melodrama that follows young girl Amna, who vows revenge against the man who seduced and ruined her older sister Hanadi, ultimately leading to her untimely death. It is wonderful. It is so poetic in its dialogue. And I think that is a good indicator that it is a good adaptation. This is also an adaptation by this very famous and prominent Egyptian novel, Teha Hussein. Apparently this novel was like the first to utilize, or an Arabic language novel to utilize flashback as a plot device in the novel. And that is a prominent device within the film itself. A lot of it relies heavily on flashback. So again, I think it's a very good adaptation in its poetic language and its use of flashback as a technique. It's really held up by the acting of the main character, Amna, played by Fatin Hameme. She's apparently, I did a lot of research on this to like put this together because I really wanted to look at this as holistically as I could. I wanted to see every part of it to really understand this. That was a nice little side note, but Fatin Hameme, who is the lead of this, she was like the queen of Egyptian cinema. One point in time, she was married to Omar Sharif, so there's a nice little tie to Lawrence of Arabia there. But she is the powerhouse in this film. She delivers so many different layered and nuanced performances as a young and innocent but headstrong girl who is influenced by modernity and city living, sort of against her will, but she adapts to it and takes to it very well. She learns how to read, she learns how to write. Then, she's this mature, well-rounded city woman. Then she's this traumatized woman who has experienced true loss and is looking for answers and is looking for justice in an unjust world when that is what her entire life has been. She looks for love. She realizes that the truest love was the love between her and her sister, and she'll never have that again. It is so compelling. It is so beautiful. It is so on par with any romantic period drama. It actually blows them out of the water. It is beautiful. I read on a couple of film blogs that this was a very popular and famous African film, so that's why we tried to make it happen for our Young Critics Watch to really expand our horizon and gain a more global approach to film. It was such a shame that it was so hard to find this. I had to check it out through interlibrary loan, but I'm so grateful for libraries. I hope that everybody has a chance to watch this because it is on par with something that came out that year, North by Northwest, in these very daring and dynamic camera movements. There are so many subjective POV shots where we watch people as they react to these horrors that they experience. At one point, the camera goes fuzzy and spins as Amma faints and passes out. And I thought that was so interesting, and it made such good use of the camera and the whole frame. This is a fabulous movie through and through. And again, I hope that everybody gets a chance to watch it.
Awesome. Yeah.
I hope I do too, because this movie's hard to find.
Very hard to find. All right. Well, we're gonna shift over into Repo Man in a second, but since that was pre-recorded, real quickly, let's do the Patreon and such right now. Thank you so much to our patrons: Cam, Ron Hayes, Tanner Huskins, Teresa Marsati, and Tyler Chandler. We appreciate you supporting the show. Patreon.com/Cinematary if you would like to support what we're doing over here at Cinematary. Next, we mentioned it a little bit before, we're going to be doing an M. Night series. Before that, we're going to be doing a journalism and movies series. We're going to do All the President's Men, Broadcast News, and Spotlight. Those 3 movies. And then we're going to jump into our M. Night Shyamalan series, which is The Sixth Sense, The Village, The Happening, and Knock at the Cabin. So exciting stuff on the frontier for Cinematary. And yeah, I hope everybody enjoys our live podcast for Repo Man after this.
Once again, we're the Cinematary Podcast, which is a movie podcast, and it looks like we're also a subpar adult softball league team. But this is episode 481. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with Grace Winburn, Andrew Swafford, Michael O'Malley, and Sam Shapiro is joining us today. And Sam, I'm going to toss it over to you. You're gonna tell us what just happened.
Okay. Before I start, I'm going to dispense with my phone first. I'm going to read you the finale of Roger Ebert's review for this movie in 1984, and then I'll put my phone away and give you a little context about how this movie came to be made, and then the folks on the panel can help explain the movie. First of all, Entertainment Weekly ranks Repo Man as number 7 in the top 50 cult films of all time. So it's 7. Roger Ebert, when this film came out, was one of the most vocal champions for this film. When I explain to you about this film's release, it'll make a little more sense. This film had a couple of afterlives, 2 or 3 afterlives. But in its first release, before it disappeared without a trace the first time, Roger Ebert did his best to prop this film up. And at the end of his review, he gave it 3 out of 4 stars. He said, and remember, at this point, Roger Ebert had quite a lot of power in the film critics community. This is 1984, well before the internet, well before blogs. So a Roger Ebert review went a long way, although it didn't help this film, at first at least. Ebert says, I saw Repo Man near the end of a busy stretch on the movie beat, 3 days during which I saw more relentlessly bad movies than during any comparable period in my memory. Most of those bad movies were so cynically constructed out of formula ideas and commercial ingredients that watching them was an ordeal. Repo Man comes out of left field, has no big stars, didn't cost much, takes chances, dares to be unconventional, is funny, and works. There is a lesson here. That's his review from January 1st, 1984. Now, this film did not do great when it was first released. Let me just give you a little background about how the film came to be made. Then I'll jump to the release part, which I find really interesting, and then I'll turn it over. You might have noticed that the person whose name you first see on the credits is Michael Nesmith. He of the toboggan with a ball on top. You remember Michael Nesmith from the Monkees? The Monkees. Of course. So he was one of the 4 Monkees, and the Monkees had broken up many years before this film was ever made. But Michael Nesmith at that point had made inroads into becoming an independent producer. If you remember, I don't know if you are aware of this, but when video became a big thing, the VHS revolution, say in the early to mid 80s, Michael Nesmith was sort of at the vanguard of that. And he produced this movie. He had seen a student film by Alex Cox called Edge City, and you saw references to Edge City in this film. In fact, the city is called Edge City. And he had made a student film that everyone was sort of wowed by, including the studios. And he never thought anything would come of it, but Michael Nesmith had a lot to do with getting the film financed through Universal Studios. Anyway, the film was made. Flash forward to the summer of 1983. I think this film was made in 2 months, July and August, summer of '83. Then the film was released a year later. Universal Studios simply did not know what to do with this movie. And it got a few obligatory screenings and then vanished. However, the soundtrack of this movie is what ultimately saved this film. I don't know if you watched the end credits, but this movie has almost like a who's who of the punk rock scene in California of the 1980s. The Circle Jerks are the band in the yellow tuxedos in the piano bar who are doing a very slow version of the song. I read somewhere that this is the only time the Circle Jerks were ever caught on film in that iteration of their lineup. So it's historic for that reason. But Iggy Pop championed this movie, and the soundtrack became a big hit. Whereas the film bombed, the soundtrack sold about 200,000 copies, LPs. CDs were about to happen, but not quite. And that propelled the film. Universal re-released it on the strength of the popularity of the soundtrack, and the movie found its audience the second time around. But I mentioned VHS earlier, and this film also came out sort of during the perfect storm when everything was about to become overrun by the VHS market and blockbusters and video stores, mom and pop video stores. And this film became a big hit through VHS. It became, literally a cult film that people passed around, like watch this videotape. It was very hard to find movies at that point. This is well before streaming, of course. Now you can just push a button and find almost anything. But this movie had a legend about it. So when it came out on VHS, people figured, it was almost that they discovered the wheel. Oh, I can watch this movie anytime now. And it became a cult film in that respect. So I guess this is the third or the fourth afterlife, because here we are.
I don't want to throw a wrench in that, but this is not streaming at the moment, so we have that going for us.
It is in the Criterion Collection, though. It's gotten another second life on home video.
That's true.
Also archive.org.
Shout out.
Well, I wanted to say one last thing, I promise, and I'll turn it over. One thing you may have noticed, although the film is kind of ragged in places, and I will admit, it does kind of run out of steam or gas. Maybe the last section of the film, it's really strange. The last section of the film, it's almost as if all these genres suddenly collide. You have the science fiction genre, you have the punk rock genre, and it's all. This movie's a hodgepodge, if it's anything. But I was saying, in spite of the fact how ragged it sometimes look, and it was improvised, much of it was improvised, it's held together by the cinematography by Robbie Mueller. This movie had a heavyweight DP. Robbie Mueller was like the top German cinematographer. When you talk about the 70s and Werner Herzog, Wim Wenders, he was famous for having shot all these landmark German films of the 70s. So he had come to Hollywood, to make his name. He was about to shoot Paris, Texas. This is a film that's going to show in this series, I think, next week. So I think it's very coincidental that Paris, Texas is almost joined at the hip to this film, because they. No. Paris, Texas is directed by Wim Wenders, German director, and was shot by Robbie Mueller, made right after this film. He had come to the U.S. to film this movie in Texas, but he had a couple weeks to sort of recharge his batteries, and he had time to make this film before making Paris, Texas. And Harry Dean Stanton was not hired to be in Paris, Texas. It was going to star somebody else, and Robbie Mueller was so impressed by Harry Dean Stanton's performance that he recommended that Harry Dean Stanton have the role in Paris, Texas. So I'll just finish by saying it's interesting. Harry Dean Stanton, who is a longtime secondary actor, he's in hundreds and hundreds of movies. I mean, just watch any movie from the 60s or 70s, and you're probably going to see Harry Dean Stanton. He's in Cool Hand Luke, he's in Alien, and about 300 other films. But this movie was sort of his first big leading role. And then from here he goes to Paris, Texas. So he had that one little year or two where he experienced what it was like to be a huge leading man before he went back to playing characters again, character actors. So much to say about this movie. I don't want to take over your podcast.
No, you're fine.
Just say one last thing. One last thing.
Okay.
Because I wanted to mention this as I was watching the movie. I know you're regretting having me in your podcast.
I'm going to insist you say more things later.
I love the fact this movie is shot in Los Angeles, but it is like the ugliest part of Los Angeles. I mean, and I would say. Let me say one thing. I would say that 75 to maybe 80% of what we do see in this film doesn't exist in Los Angeles anymore. It's all been skyscrapered over. So he did find a section of Los Angeles that appealed to his punk ethos. And by the way, Alex Cox, another bridge in this movie, he was a British director who had grown up, during the 70s with the Sex Pistols and the Clash. So he was very much had that punk ethos. That's why this movie was like the perfect fit for him, because he just went from the British punk scene to the California punk scene. So everything sort of came together beautifully for this movie, in spite of the fact that it wasn't a huge hit. All right, I have nothing else to say. I'm sorry.
Well, this is the second time I've watched this. I watched it literally a couple days ago in preparation of this. The first time I watched it, I very much in the mold that you were talking about, where everything kind of collides at the end. I'm just kind of going through this, going like, all right, like one thing after another kind of happens, and you're like, okay, and then it gets to the end, and you're like, okay. Yeah. It was a lot more fun the second time, where you kind of know where it's going, and you can just enjoy. Just the absurdity of the entire thing, but also just the lines. An endlessly quotable movie. I have about 50 quotes that I'm going to be, repeating from this movie.
We've said, let's go do some crimes multiple times today.
I said it before we even started this thing. Yeah, no, let's go get sushi and not pay for it. Great line. But yeah, Michael, what did you think of the movie?
It's good. I've seen it a few different times. This is my third, I think. And I think each time it comes together a little bit better. And maybe this goes to like the VHS element that you were talking about, because I think one of the things that I've noticed a lot in movies that kind of gather this cult following is that repeated viewings can, reveal kind of the kind of threads in here. And watching this, I noticed a lot of like recurring bits that hadn't occurred to me before. Like, so for instance, like when the car is like floating at the end, and the guy's like, "Best damn car in the lot," or whatever his line is. That's like from the beginning of the movie as well. And I mean, I think just it kind of. The plot's kind of, woolly still, but like I think that like the the little like bit characters and things like that, like just the way that they inhabit the environment of this movie, I think like really rewards, at least for me, like having seen this movie multiple times. What about the rest
I would
of you?
agree. Yeah, and I'm in that vein of like watching it again and again and kind of like seeing all these threads come together. I feel a little bit like the conspiracy theorist guy who's like, this is a lattice of coincidence. Everything is coming together. But I do feel like there is some sense to be made of the absurdity of this movie. I don't think this is a movie that's kind of like put together shoddily or thoughtlessly.
Yeah, 100%.
It actually strikes me as like a very political movie, and in a way that like doesn't immediately register because the characters are so non-political. But it's kind of using or investigating the politics or lack thereof of a punk scene.
Right. Well,
Right.
not just the scene, but then you have like actual literal like news. Like at one point, there's like a newsreel going on about like one of the U.S. interventions in Central America, right? Where. And then there's another part where the televangelist like gets the call about the missing Malibu, which has to have come from the government,
the cops,
right?
Yeah.
So like all the like TV stuff is like tying together that there's like an overarching like kind of political program that's being played out within this punk scene.
And like punk music is in many cases very political, right? Like think of the iconic anarchist A that you've seen everywhere, right? Anarchism is like a political philosophy. It's not just like fuck my boss, fuck everybody, And it's interesting to me that the punks in this movie don't embody that philosophical underpinnings of anarchism or any other sort of like punk guiding ethos at all. There's even that scene where Harry Dean Stanton says like people don't live by a code anymore. He's got the Repo code, right? So this is why Otto, Emilio Estevez's character, has no qualms whatsoever with going from being a punk to being a repo man, because like he didn't really believe anything when he was a punk either. He was just kind of like part of this community, right?
Yeah. Grace.
Well, I would love to build off of that because this is my second time watching this. This has been endlessly recommended to me by all of my favorite crusty elder punks. This is essential viewing. This is a primer. But I did really latch on to everyone looking for a philosophy, a way to navigate their life, either the Repo Man's code, but it also seems like everybody kind of flakes on all of their codes, even by the end. The punks, Duke in the car before they have their last big shootout, he's like, why don't we just settle down? I want you to have my baby. It just seems like the thing to do. If that's, societal norms, pressure on him, he blames society with his dying breath. Everybody's so wishy-washy. Nobody has any real code that they abide by except for Miller, I found, and he's the only one that's able to approach this car. And there's this sort of enlightenment that Miller and Otto share in the very end as they ride off into the sunset on the car. Everybody's looking for a philosophy, and I really latched onto that in this second viewing. The back and forth, and how easy it is to say something, but then to do the opposite.
Well, because they divest at the end, right? Like everyone. The real philosophy is kind of like laissez-faire capitalism, right? Where everyone is like fighting to have the greatest gain through self-interest, right? And so all these other philosophies that they have are kind of just meta-narrative, right? Like Harry Dean Stanton like has his code, but like really he wants to go solo, right? He wants to get the Malibu so he can be like an entrepreneurial repo man. And like at the end, like they float away on the car, like with no money, like no anything. Like it is like a sort of like, it's like the ultimate fuck the system move in the sense of like they don't even cash out. Like they have the car and they decide like they're not going to take the $20,000.
Can I ask what y'all make of the ending where they float off with the car? Like it seems like such a symbol, but I don't really know what to do with it personally. It's a time machine.
Yeah, they're going to go back and populate the earth, obviously.
I don't know. I kind of just, because Otto's just such a kind of dummy the entire time, which I appreciate about him. We need more dummy cinema. Don't want to get political here, but I kind of like, I'm going to take the dummy approach on it and be like, there's a cool flying nuclear radiating car, and it's like, what else am I going to do? Am I going to go back to this job? That's not going anywhere. Am I going to go back to my girlfriend? She wanted to torture me.
She did torture him.
She did torture him. Like, so what else am I going to do? I'm going to get in the car and float away and fly off. Like, what other avenue do I have in life to pursue? Let's open it to the audience already.
Just real quick, just say that one of the things that's great about this movie is it's very much a parody and a satire of Reagan America. I mean, this very in bed with the televangelists and the government being in bed together and everybody being on the make for themselves and everybody trying to cash out. And with the end of the movie, the characters basically saying, F this, we're not going to be a part of this ridiculous thing that the United States had turned into in 1984.
Can I say, if you look at the films in this series, actually, about half the films, this is an interesting series because you have blockbusters like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and The Natural, but you also have Streets of Fire. What was the one you mentioned?
Red Dawn.
Red Dawn. This movie, the one we just saw. There was something in the water in 1984. You had a year or two after the huge blockbusters, E.T., Raiders of the Lost Ark. There's a book that was just published about how that year was monumental for the big budget science fiction. Blade Runner came out literally the same week as E.T. came out. But in 84, you had really bizarre, and I think what you were mentioning, these films were like meant as attacks on conservative they were coming out of Hollywood, and Hollywood, which is mostly left wing, was looking upon Reagan as someone who had formerly been head of the Screen Actors or whatever it was SAG, and they sort of looked upon him as someone who would, he very, very Republican, very conservative. So all the movies coming out in 84, and I realized Reagan was reelected, but in that year of 84, you had Class of 84, which was a punk rock film. You had Suburbia by Penelope Spheris, I think was the last name. You had this film, Repo Man, Streets of Fire. A lot of these films, Brother from Another Planet, which was a low-budget John Sayles film.
Coming here?
Right. They were subversive, low-budget science fiction films that had punks, at front and center in a lot of these films. I mean, you can even find punks in Blade Runner. I mean, Blade Runner was using them. So I don't know if it's a coincidence that all these movies were made at the same time, but I just think it's interesting.
Yeah.
So if you're familiar with Buckaroo Banzai, which I'm not sure if that's in this particular series, that was going to be my second choice after this, but they're very similar as being sort of these crazy, surreal, colorful, low-budget, cult-like science fiction films.
I have a thought about that because this series is so different from what people typically think of as like the stereotypical 80s movies. There's not a Ghostbusters or a Back to the Future or a Terminator or something on this list. And like
the Terminator's on there.
It's interesting to me how we as a film culture are still kind of like perpetually stuck in the 80s. Like these 80s properties like keep getting remade and revived and things like that. And so much of the pop culture that's like dominating the film and TV world now, like superheroes, like that was also had like this big boom in the 80s as well. And I think about that when I look at the kind of the set design of this movie and like how everything has this really generic label. Like, let's get a drink. You just sit down a thing that says drink on it at the cash register. And it feels to me like Alex Cox is one of the things he's kind of like shaking his fist at regarding Reagan's America is like how like culturally homogenized everything has become. Like there isn't a sense of like things being handmade and personal anymore. It's just all kind of like corporate.
The movie was
product,
probably going for
right?
that, with the supermarket.
Let me ask one more thing, and then let's open up to some questions and comments. And maybe Sam, you can answer this. You mentioned Iggy Pop is a big champion of this movie. Where does Alex Cox fit in with like the punk scene? Is that something that he was a part of, or where did that come from?
As I was saying, he was from England, and he looked upon, he has mentioned the whole business with extraterrestrials and showing this side of Los Angeles. He admitted that he was looking at America from the point of view of a foreigner. Just like the next film, Paris, Texas, was also like a foreign perspective of America. So he already saw it as weird. I mentioned that he had come from England, in the late 70s. You had the Sex Pistols and the Clash. So this was a perfect fit for him. The movie he makes after, does anyone know what movie he made after Repo Man? Sid and Nancy, with Gary Oldman as Sid Vicious. And that was a bigger budget film than this film, Repo Man. So he became known as sort of like Hollywood's punk director. And his next film after Sid and Nancy was Straight to Hell, which starred the Clash in that film. And that was sort of the beginning of his descent. So his movies became sort of verboten with Hollywood, and whereas you would thought that with Repo Man and Sid and Nancy was a very promising career, he sort of just, I don't know the exact story. He's continued to make movies, but none of them ever really get released, or they go straight to video. He actually made a sequel to this film, Repo Man, which I think went straight to video. I haven't seen it. I need to search it out.
It's called Repo Girl, I think.
Okay.
Why not Repo Woman? Wah, wah.
All right. Just throw a hand up. Yeah. All we ask is that you speak in the microphone because we're recording.
I think I watched this movie 8 or 12 years ago. I don't even know. And the funny thing that you mentioned, the VHS, is I don't remember if I watched on TV or if I rented it. But it's not been shown. I've actually looked it up once or twice. I couldn't find it. So I thought it's kind of funny how it's not shown up on anything from Turner Movie Classics to anything else where it's gone over and over again and would show it. And I thought it was funny that it's kind of disappeared, even though I thought, I know I watched it, it had to be over a decade ago. And when I was just surfing and saw it out of the corner of my eye today, I'm like, I gotta go see this because I haven't seen it and I haven't found it and I haven't looked for it. I just thought I was curious that it's not out there.
Yeah, I wasn't aware. I know that it's on Criterion and they put out the Blu-ray, but as far as streaming, I'm surprised that it's unstreamable at this point.
You can rent. I think you can rent it, but it's not on like Netflix or anything. I actually have a question for people in the audience because like I came to this movie with the baggage of knowing that it was kind of like a cult classic and it had like this like association with the punk scene. Like, was anyone around like just to kind of catch it like naively and like didn't know what they were in for? I'm curious what the reaction was. You want to share?
Pretty familiar with punk rock filmmaking, sort of in that genre. I thought it was a lot more comedic than I would have expected. Very emotional ending for me. Everyone seemed to be making fun of it, but I was sad by the end. I thought it was beautiful. They got their dream at the end. They both just like kind of escaped everything that held them down. I don't know. I thought it was great.
Awesome.
Well, Tracy Walter, the actor, played, what's his name? The guy who drives off?
Miller.
Yeah, I mean, he's fantastic in this movie. You would think that his monologues had been improvised, that he was just making them up on the spot. But in my research, there was a script, and he stuck very close to it. I think he made some additions to it, but there was a strict. I'm sorry? There was a question?
No.
Go ahead.
Anything else?
No, I thought you had a comment about.
No, hardly. It's just really funny that people are named after major beer brands, Bud, Miller, and Light, and then they're. Oh yeah. That just really stuck out to me. They don't go out for a Bud Light or a Miller Lite, but they go out for a beer. And I'm still sort of working out the generic food labeling. What was that about? Absolutely, nodding your head.
Wait. You weren't even born then. There was all that generic stuff was out there in the 80s.
Yeah, I actually read this.
Especially if you were low income and things like this, because none of these people had any money, right? Nobody was struggling. That was there in the grocery store. It literally was sitting there. I remember I didn't buy that much beer or anything that said food on it, but I thought it was funny that it had it there, you know.
I actually was reading, so Criterion has like a little booklet in their release of it, and they said that all the generic food they actually took from real grocery stores, except for they made a beer one, they made a food one, and then I can't remember what the third one is. There were only 3 that they had to create themselves.
There was a lot more than that, but they were literally looked just like that. They were blue and white.
Man, the 80s, what a time.
Hey there. I also remember that 2 years after that, in '86, Public Image Limited released their album called Album, their CD called CD, and their, what was it?
And that was which group?
Public Image Limited.
Oh, right.
And they also used the same blue horizontal line, just like in the movie. So I guess they were inspired by the movie.
Huh. What do you know? I tell you, since you brought up rock music, I'll give you a little factoid I read about the making of this movie. Would you believe that before Harry Dean Stanton got the role, the producers came very close to landing Mick Jagger to play the head Repo Man, and that Alex Cox was so weirded out by that he actually
would not have been very
Harry
punk
Dean
rock.
Stanton. I don't know if Mick Jagger would have ultimately taken it, but.
I was just gonna say thank y'all so much for doing this. This is one of the one movie that I've probably seen more than any other movie, and this turned me on to bands like the Plugs and stuff like that, and even that band that's the mod rocker dudes. That's the band Untouchables from LA. So that whole soundtrack's insane. But just being 13 watching this and skate videos just made me become a fucking punk. Oh, sorry, can I curse?
No, you can curse.
Okay, cool. All right. Yeah, so thank y'all for doing this. Yeah.
How did you first come across the movie?
Some older punk dude. I don't know. Or actually, no. One of the dudes that helped raise me, he was the first bass player in Anti-Scene, and I think he showed it to me when I was probably 12 or something.
Okay.
12 or 13. Yeah.
Interesting.
So yeah, and Anti-Scene's a band from here that's old school punk.
Sure,
Yeah.
I remember.
Yeah.
Hollywood had such a weird relation with punks in the 80s. I mentioned this film, but usually they were used as parodies or as punching bags. I just rewatched The Terminator, which I hadn't seen. I mean, the Terminator's first victims are a gang of hardcore punks, punk rockers, played by Bill Paxton, if you want to get down to the weeds about it. So I just found that interesting. Also, there were a lot of movies, all those references to the apocalypse reminded me that in 1984 was the year of The Day After. A lot of movies about what if the world was, if there was a nuclear apocalypse. So that was very much also in the water and in the air when this movie was made, which I think explains those special effects at the end of the movie when everything gets radiated, the car, with the very 80s special effects. So.
Yeah.
By the way, in 1984, they made the movie 1984 too.
That's right. Richard
And
Burton.
then I'm from SoCal, so LA has not changed that much. You could drive around LA and see that all day long. The same street. Well, the homeless are about 100 times worse now than it used to be. But I lived there from 86 through 99, and I went into downtown LA after the riots, right. and while the whole place is still smoking, it still looks like that, and some of the places in LA still look like that right now. It is not all high rises. And a lot of the streets that they shot on are probably still looking exactly like that.
Well, speaking of that, I'm fascinated by the LA River. I have a running list in my head of the classic L.A. River movies. I got Chinatown,
Terminator
Grease,
2.
The Terminator 2. This movie has an awesome chase scene on the L.A. River, which makes me wonder, having not lived in Los Angeles, is it as easy in real life to drive onto the L.A. River as it is in movies?
There's also a ditch in the canal that goes down the middle of it.
Yeah.
So you can't like literally go like this back and forth. Because you go like this, your car's going to go down.
And I know you.
Edges, yes.
And I know you guys talked about Point Blank, which has an LA River scene also. Yeah.
Anything else from folks?
But the LA River goes from 0 to like 20 feet high in a matter of minutes.
I graduated high school in '84, and I probably saw Repo. I don't think I saw it at the theater. So I don't remember it. It's a lot more funny than I remembered it. I mean, how many years has that been? Almost 40 years now, I guess, maybe since I've seen it. And I noticed when I was watching it, I probably need to watch it again because there's a lot of sound going in the background that you have to pay attention to. Like you mentioned, the evangelist on the TV, stuff on the car radio, stuff that people are saying. And at one point, they're all in the car and somebody is talking about a pig on a farm with a wooden leg, and I'm really devastated that I didn't get to find out.
Yeah, it was like a joke, and you never don't get to hear the punchline. I do think like on that element, like one thing that I'm kind of into that this movie feels like it taps into is the kind of postmodern literature, like William S. Burroughs or Thomas Pynchon or whatever, and a lot of those books are kind of like that, where they're so full of like detail and noise that like it can be really hard at first pass to like feel like you get everything. And I think that this movie kind of evokes that feeling of like Naked Lunch or Gravity's Rainbow or something like that.
And like a Pynchon novel, it feels like there's like this very vague conspiracy kind of happening on the margins of the movie. You know, most of this movie doesn't involve the chase for the radioactive car. It's mostly just Otto trying to live his life and make a few bucks. But like you get these scenes here and there, and just like things that you get noticed on in like the background of the scenes that suggest that there's larger forces at work in the world. And I think it's interesting that that guy who just like burns all the stuff in the cars, he says
it's so amazing,
amazing, and like he's. His explanation for like how all these things fit together is hysterical because of how like I guess uninformed and like detached from any sort of political reality it is. Like it seems as though Alex Cox is presenting like this kind of like paranormal conspiracism as like class unconsciousness, like a way to keep people from noticing actual like material political reality that is also controlling their lives.
Shout out to the guy who's like, I just love this job. It's just more of a calling than a spiritual connection. He's like a spook from the FBI. Yeah, X-Files is like early 90s.
But it reminded me, the secret agents reminded me somewhat of that also. There's even some Doctor Who in this. This movie has everything in it, really. There was something else. This is the part you're going to edit out of the podcast, right? Where I'm.
While Sam's thinking, does anybody have something to say?
So I haven't seen this film in years. Well, I mean, just now, but I was kind of struck by how much it reminded me of Kiss Me Deadly.
Absolutely.
But thank you for bringing that up, because we mentioned that we needed to bring that up.
And that movie is insanely cynical, but this one's really optimistic. I know that Kiss Me Deadly had an influence on Pulp Fiction with the briefcase. I've never heard him mention Repo Man, but there's so much. Yeah, because like just the structure and everything.
Yeah.
So I was just curious if you guys had heard that about the film.
Yeah, definitely the mystery behind the what's in the trunk of the car and the way people like incinerate or self-incinerate. That's right out of Kiss Me Deadly. There's a lot of film noir in this. There's a scene where Otto throws hot scalding coffee into the face of somebody. That's from The Big Heat, where Lee Marvin throws coffee into Gloria Graham's face. Am I getting a little too into the weeds for that?
No, you're good. You're good. Michael, though, I remember earlier today you were talking about the Kiss Me Deadly connection, and you said something about like something you read about the protagonists of those films?
Yeah, it's like
being
interesting to compare. Like in Kiss Me Deadly, the protagonist is just like this like ultra hard boiled like detective
Mike
guy.
Hammer.
Right? And then in this one, he's not exactly like that because he has this kind of like doe-eyed like naivety to him a little bit, you know. But in a certain, they're both kind of like unmoored characters who are just kind of like flitting around their environments and have the capacity to be kind of mean at times. And it's kind of interesting to compare them, and I think they're kind of tonally different like in the movies, but they both have like a similar role in the sense of them kind of ping-ponging around like different environments without being tethered to them.
The other thing I was going to mention, someone mentioned the televangelist. This also really makes the film, I mean, as someone who was very much alive in 1984, living in this area, you had the PTL Club, Jim Baker, and so I thought very much about that when we saw the parents watching the televangelist.
The ex-hippie parents, like they're supposed to be ex-hippie parents, right? Like that is kind of interesting in the movie. You have like Miller, and like at one point they make a joke like, "How much ass did you do in the hippie era?"
Right,
and then you've got his parents who are like brainwashed like by like, you know, Reagan and televangelists and all that.
Anything else? Anybody?
I also counted about 6 phone booths in this movie. You know, phone booths are, of course, completely gone, obsolete, extinct. But you notice how many phone booths there were in this movie? Yes.
The thing that made me laugh the most was when they tried to get through the door, and it was like they pushed instead of pulled. And so I just want to know what of those moments made, like there were so many throughout the movie. What were your favorites?
The one that got me on the second one was when they're beating up the agent guys in the auto place, and the guy goes, "Not my face," and then she hits him, and you just hear him go, "My face!" It was like a SpongeBob gag.
We were laughing about this earlier in the day, but when Kevin, his like maybe best friend or ex-coworker or whatever, is talking about how there's a lot of movement in being a fry cook, in a couple of years I could be a manager, a king, a god.
Gosh, I had it's the moment where like he's just hanging out in the office and there's a TV on showing like some war crimes happening in Guatemala, and he's reading an Outlaws of Democracy porno mag. Very good.
I really liked at the very end where Bud is in the car and Otto's standing above him. He's like, "Well, we could split it 60-40. Yeah, who gets what? Well, I figure since I found it," pulls the gun, "you can have it." That got me both times.
I thought Emilio Estevez and Harry Dean Stanton were really good together. I mean, they had a lot of charisma, and I almost see this alternate reality where they became like a buddy team over a series of sequels. I think they had it. If this film had gone another way, you could almost see that turning into some kind of a little franchise there. But they work really well together. Both are very charismatic actors. And that was the point where Emilio Estevez was probably at the top of his game I think he had just done The Breakfast Club, and he was a big star, a bigger star than Charlie Sheen at that point.
If you can believe it.
Any other questions or comments about this film?
Are they going to redo it, do you think? Try to redo that thing?
They better not.
A big budget remake.
Yeah, I couldn't see a big because then it would you would have the CGI behind it, and that's not fun. You want to see the car looking a little bit fake, you know.
It would be like it would be in direct opposition to the punk sensibilities and ethos to sell out and make a big budget, remake. Come on.
I also think that you could to do it remaking this entirely, doing the actual punk music and all that would be kind of it'd be like a nostalgia object, right? Because punk rock doesn't exist as this kind of fringe culture.
You'd have to pick a different genre.
You'd have to pick a different genre,
Yeah.
different I don't know. It might have to be trap music or something like that. I don't know. But even that is pretty thoroughly
that's very
institutionalized.
mainstream,
But I'm to pick something more contemporary.
Put it in the vaporwave era. Let's do a vaporwave Repo Man.
So what you're saying is that if they remade it, it would have to be Jane Schoenbrunn who.
Oh yeah,
who would
Jane
remake it?
Schoenbrunn's Vaporwave Repo Man. I'd
be hell yeah.
Yeah.
Never mind. I'm back on board.
I don't
on
want to
the
see the CGI though. I want to see that like skeleton that looks like it was drawn with Sharpie. It's so
You
good.
gotta have
The
that.
DIY feel
Absolutely.
is off the charts. Yeah.
Nothing but the shoes. The shoes were very strong. Everything else got burnt but the shoes.
For some reason, those scenes reminded me of a spaghetti western where someone is shot and you see the boots smoking in the street. I think this. Did anyone have any problems with the love relationship in this film? That seemed off in this
Otto
film.
had some problems with it.
Yeah. It seemed off. It almost seemed like it was shoehorned into the film.
What the relationship where they hooked up once and then he got undressed at her work and then she tortured him,
Right.
and then he left her to go fly in the alien car.
Well, but I think even before they hook up, she's walking out of the car and he's like, do I get to see you again? She's telling him off, and then all of a sudden she wants to have sex with him. It's kind of random.
Yeah.
It just goes into the whole fact of there's a lot of stuff being thrown together. There's a romance plot. There's a sci-fi plot.
They're throwing everything at the wall.
Yeah.
Sticks, and many things do stick in this film, but some kind of don't.
The other note, this kind of goes back to stuff that I was laughing at in this movie that I just realized on the second watch. They rob the same liquor store every time. After the second time, you would think that the liquor store would be like, hey, let's find a better way to go about our business, because every time Harry Dean Stanton and Emilio Estevez are in this place, we're getting robbed.
Well, also, the first time they walk in, they've just been robbed, and Harry Dean Stanton walks in, he's like, it's too quiet in here.
That was LA, they get robbed all the time.
Yeah. Any final thoughts from y'all on Repo Man? Grace?
Would watch again. I think that this is one that benefits from multiple viewings because there's always going to be something else to laugh at or something else to pick up on. As you had mentioned, there's such a noisy soundscape. Things come in and out, and as I snap out of the main story being told to me, I pick up something else, but then I just jump right back into it. So I'd like to see if I can pick up the rest of the noisy soundscape.
Yeah, I don't really have a whole lot to add. I feel like we've said most of what it struck me while watching the movie again. But it is a great time. I really like Repo Man. Would watch again. Yeah. Michael? Oh, also, I'm curious. Do you have thoughts on this as anti-car cinema?
I mean, the more you drive, the less intelligence you get. I enjoy this more every time.
Sam?
Thanks for having me.
One question. You guys do this once a month, or what's going on here?
Well, if you QR code one of these wonderful QR codes, you can follow the podcast. We do 2 each month generally. It's every 2 weeks. No, these folks came all the way from Knoxville to join us today at the Independent Picture House.
It's also not normally live at a theater. This is kind of a unique.
I think we should do live in a theater every time.
That would be cool. That would be cool.
But yeah, thank you everybody who came here. Thank you Independent Picture House for hosting this. Like I said, so this is our Spotify, our YouTube, and our Patreon. This podcast we do, like I said, this is the 481st episode. We've been doing this for a while. This is the conclusion of our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series. We're about to kick into a journalism series with 3 films about journalism. Yeah. And then after that, we're doing an M. Night Shyamalan series. So if that appeals to you, check out the podcast and see what we're doing. But thank you so much for sticking around, and let's go get some sushi and not pay for it.